Hello, my name is Bryant Hutt, and my channel is simply called Discerning What is True. And I'm going to be sharing from a particular book that I've been reading here, which is called Charts of Christian Theology and Doctrines. And what I want to deal with is the the 5 points. And this is I've done already the 2 points already, dealing with what we call Arminianism and Calvinism. These are the two major, what I would call branches in the Protestant churches, so to speak, although almost all of them are really actually Calvinists. They don't even know it. So we're going to deal with the third point of what we call the tulip, which is what the Calvinists deal with. And by the way, Calvinists, John Calvin is what it's named after. He's the one who came up with some of these deals, although there were others that he had with him that were a gentleman called Theodore Basil, who was in Geneva, also John Knox, and others in Geneva, Switzerland, that was. And most of this Calvinism thinking is in what we call Reformed churches and also Presbyterian churches here in America, but it's also throughout the world. So this is taking place with the Protestant perspective. This is not a Catholic deal here, so to speak. This is what we call Reformed churches, basically. And Lutheran is somewhat in this category also, although this is not a claim of the Lutherans themselves. They would be, sort of out that perspective. They wouldn't deal with this particular 5 points, what we're talking about. So let's read what the Arminians' perspective is, and then the Calvinist perspective here on what we call limited atonement. I call it at one ment because I believe the word is actually should be at one ment. You should be at one's self within, being at true self. But they consider it, they call it atonement. So the Armenians, they will look at what they call the issue again of limited atonement, is they look at universal redemption or general atonement. So they don't see it as being limited. Their perspective here is simply Christ's redeeming work made it possible for everyone to be saved, but not it did not actually secure the salvation of anyone. Okay. Now, although Christ died for all people and for every person, only those who believe on him are saved. His death enabled God to pardon sinners on the condition that they believe, but it did not actually put away anyone's sins. That is, Christ's redemption becomes effectively only if a person chooses to accept it. Now, I want to explain one other thing is my prerequisite here is that I don't believe any of this anymore. Neither side. It's a joke because the perspective here simply is it's a literal interpretation of Scripture, and Scripture is not meant to be literal. It never was meant to be that way, but that's how people looked at it. 95% of the people in this planet believe that simply as the Bible is supposed to be literal. They don't understand simply is that it's actually esoteric. It has hidden meaning. They don't understand when you look at the Old and New Testament. There's we would think about simply is that there's a God of what we call anger, or jealous God, so to speak, as many people would say in the Old Testament. Then there's suddenly a completely different perspective of who God is. In fact, there's emphasis almost all on Jesus, so to speak, which is part of the Trinity type of deal. I don't believe in any aspect of what I call the literal interpretation of Scripture because it's wrong. It doesn't make sense because I don't believe God is a tyrant. I don't believe that's what this is about. This is speaking in stories and riddles. Unfortunately, most of us can't figure out what the riddles are. And so what I'm doing here is to explain to those who are in the church to actually begin to say, something's not right here. Let me question this. Let me pursue this in some way and deepen my thinking here, and let me see if there's something else out there that is not literal interpretation. So they would say simply is that the Arminianism, that would be mainly your Methodist, more than any other group out there. Although this was started by Jacob Arminius. And what happened was the Synod that took place at Dor, which is, I think, in Holland, was trying a stopping point because the Calvinists realized that the Armenians were actually making ground upon them. In other words, they were fearful of these Armenians and stuff becoming what I would call popular, their belief system. And so they were trying to dismiss it and try to destroy it before it actually got to the point of a snowball going downhill and becoming a giant boulder, so to speak. So as I read here, simply as they're saying, simply it's all based upon belief. You hear this. His death enabled God to pardon sinners on the condition that they believe. Well, what is believe? Believe what? See, is either this is also a caricature what we call division. Again, what we call division within. That is to do with one side and the other, but both sides are wrong. It's sort of like Republican and Democrat. You see, both sides are wrong. Okay, if you can look at things in what I call a higher position, so to speak, and look at these things and realize simply is, wait a minute, if I get involved in this, simply is it's nonsense, and that's what this is. You see, but I also feel simply is I need to point these things out to those who have ears to hear. You see, so the Armenians simply is you just simply have to believe that his death enabled God to pardon sinners, but it doesn't say that they actually puts away any sinners, that their sin. This is what the Armenians are saying. No, it's still there. You see, you've got to deal with it, so to speak. So in reality, simply that's how they're looking at it. They would say Christ's redemption become effective only if a person chooses to accept it. Well, yeah, to a point, yes, but do you see? This is what they keep saying. This whole idea, accept it. So it's not what transpires, as they're saying simply is, yeah, they accept it, but it's like turning, it's like I would call having dirty water and using a filtering system over and over again to get that sin out of your life, so to speak. You see, so the water will become pure. You see, and it's just like a filtering system, so to speak. But the Calvinists take a different perspective. They're extremely pretty hard-headed here because they're certain of what they believe in. So they would say simply is a particular redemption. So it's not offered to any. It's for only offered for those who are chosen. And I pointed out in the second point, and I shared this a couple of days ago, was to deal with what I would call. Then that leads to God being simply as He chooses whoever He wants. And that's a fallacy, because God, if you have free will, and that's what even Arminians claim to have, but the Calvinists dismiss free will completely. They don't believe in free will, and that's the Calvinists, which is John Calvin again, like I'm saying, is to deal with what I would call simply a perspective. Simply is that God chooses you. He chooses you to be a reprobate or either a Christian. And so this is what bothers people, and it should bother people because it's scary. Because basically what they're saying is simply God chooses who He wants to be redeemed and chooses ones He don't want to redeem. And then you put this whole perspective back to, there's no reincarnation in Christianity. That's not taught in Christianity at all. So they look at simply as just, you hear one time and it's done. You see. And this is the pressure they put upon anyone who comes in their churches. You only live here, you only come around once, they would say. You remember the old advertisement by a beer company a long time ago. You only go around once in life. Okay, that's they're saying simply you only have one incarnation, so to speak. And that's what this whole perspective here with both groups are saying, that you only go around once. So they put enormous pressure upon people. You only go around one time here, and that's it. And so you either choose heaven or hell. You see. And then that's what the Armenians are saying, you do have a choice somewhat. Although when you look at the Calvinists, they're saying, no, you choose. You see, you choose, and guess what happens? And you don't choose in the Calvinist belief. You are chosen by God. He somehow gave you divine grace, and you become a believer, so to speak. But in reality, that's false, completely false. And again, this again makes it critical for people to understand. I'm trying to make it very clear to you as best I can here, is that they put enormous pressure upon people to make a decision, so to speak, in order to get converts. The same thing in the Catholic Church in the same way, you see. So let's go back with the Calvinists saying here. They would say simply a particular redemption or limited atonement. Christ's redeeming work was intended to save the elect only. So elect only means simply the chosen. So that meant simply is that God's work, that is Jesus dying on the cross, meaning is simply that his work was effective, meaning that it was not useless. It means simply is that what he did on the cross, died on the cross, and rose again, such and such, in a exoteric perspective, meaning that simply is that it doesn't fail, because it was meant for certain people to accept and certain people to not accept. Or God basically chose not to elect you, but chose to elect this person. So then that leads simply is, when you think about that thought, leads to another supposition here. Then you make, what you're saying simply is God chooses who can be a Christian and who cannot be. And that is man's fallacy. That's a fallacy on his part and the thinking part. When you begin to logically think this thing out, you realize, wait a minute, you're making God the author of sin. You're not only making God the author of sin, you're making God in a way simply that he chooses one group of people because he likes them and chooses not to the other way. And that would be partisanship, which means simply is God would not be all loving, would he? Would he? Think about it. Because in reality, simply, he would not be all loving, you see. And this is another fallacy, you see, with the church system. And most people are not able to think logically out these things, 1, 2, 3, and understand simply is what's going on here, you see. And this is why also what we call missionaries go out and go places around the world to, quote unquote, to bring people to Christ. Okay. And the Arminians would do that. And they would know simply is that, if people choose to believe. Well, what does believe mean? It just simply believes in a story. Believes in something that Jesus did on the cross. But in reality simply is, we don't even know that Jesus ever existed. Okay? So that changes the whole dynamic here completely. And this is what I'm trying to say simply is that the Bible itself is written in a way that is esoteric, and it's not exoteric. It's not outside of you, it's esoteric within you. God's already within you already, all of us. Do you follow? Do you understand that God is in all of us? Every one of us, black, white, yellow, red, whatever you want to call it, he's there. Okay? And you see, this is man's systems of his whole cleverness is actually, is when you begin to break it down, is asinine. It doesn't make any sense, you see, because it's not true. So Christ's redemption secured everything necessary for their salvation. In other words, he's done it all. That means he's included their faith. In other words, he's the one who gave them faith, not them. They're not, see. So this is all God doing everything, and which unites them to him. The gift of faith is infallible, applied by the Spirit to all for whom Christ died, D-I-E-D, so it's past tense, therefore guaranteeing their salvation. Now, the Arminians would not guarantee salvation here in this particular statement here, because they're saying it did not actually put away anyone's sins. Christ's redemption becomes effective only if a person chooses to accept it. But in reality, simply is, with this means that someone, they have the Arminian perspective is simply, it means that you have the ball. Meanwhile, in Calvinists, you don't have the ball. In other words, you're chosen. And what that means simply is, gives the excuse simply is, that I hear and has here, and you see, is that the Calvinists would see the simply, oh, he's a Christian, such and such, we know that, but yet he's out here sinning. He's doing all kinds of mischievous things. He's doing all kinds of things. No. They would see it simply as God's already covered that. And that's what almost all preachers preach today. And it's a lie. All of it's a lie. And it's like putting a minnow out to a fish, so to speak, or a worm. And people people picked up on this, and they're gullible, and they don't realize this because there's so much pressure put upon them. You know, they play these songs and all this type of thing, sorrowful, such and such, and it's trying to get you in the mood. It's a psychological warfare, simply bound, folks. It's a psychological weapon used upon people. The pastors, the preachers are geared that way to teach these things, to lead people, to psychologically become malleable to the point simply is they can lead them in a way. And then what happens simply is that, you know, it's whatever they do after that. That's why when there was struggles with Arminians simply is when they say, well, they're not living the life. They're not living a Christian life. They're out here. Actually, the guy's married. He's seeing another woman. He's married. He's seeing another woman. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. You see. So there's all kinds of red flags here. And I don't want to go a whole long time, a minute here, because it's not really a long time video anyway. But the point that you have to understand here is I'm tremendously trying to remind you that these are not, this is not, they're taking the Bible being literal. And they don't understand what they're being, they don't understand what they're reading because they've been taught themselves as quote unquote exegesis and scripture. And they lead certain verses and such and such. Do you understand? I'll say another thing here real quickly. If you are a Presbyterian in church, such and such, and you're a young boy and eventually get to the college age or, you know, to the age of seminary, what happens simply is that you don't go to a Baptist seminary. You most likely 99% go to a Presbyterian seminary because that's what you believe in. That's what you think is true. So you go to a seminary for their right teaching, such and such, in your own particular denomination. So, you know, you could go to another church like the Methodists have seminaries, you have the Lutherans have seminaries, you have the Presbyterians, you have the Baptists, all these groups, such as the Assembly of God, have seminaries. All these groups have seminaries. Even the Amish, I think, have a seminary, or the Mennonites, I should say. I don't know if the Amish do. Maybe I know the Mennonites have a seminary. And so all this type of stuff. You have even the group that's what I would call Grace Theological Seminary, which is a Grace Brethren Church, which is a small denomination, less than 30,000 people in the whole United States, but yet they have their own seminary, you see. But what I'm trying to explain to you in a deep way here is that it never was meant to be taken literal. And all this stuff, talk about Revelation such and such that people hear, all these things are going to come to pass such and such. No, folks, that's not what it means. You see, you're taking it literal. It's all fear-based, you see. And we've been told many times, and even in my lifetime, oh, Jesus is going to come back. Jesus is going to come back for his people, such and such. And, you know, and that's the study of what we call eschatology, the last days, so to speak. That's their particular teachings. So this is how people are rigged in, you know, like reeled in, so to speak, you see. And so I just want to make it be clear here that what this is talking about simply is already built on a false foundation. Both sides, Arminianism and Calvinism, both are wrong because there is no literal interpretation of Scripture. It never was, never will be. And if you can see that, you can come to realization simply is that I come here many times. That's what reincarnation is. They do not believe in reincarnation. Neither side whatsoever would believe that, you see. It's also a reason why many churches are losing parishioners because people are beginning to sort of open up and figure out some of these things on their own and saying, this doesn't jive, this doesn't fit. And see, you used to have what I call a Christian perspective all the time being promoted out to you all the time by the media, so to speak. But now there's other groups coming in. And I'm not saying they're right neither. I'm just saying simply there's other ways people look at things and suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. You know, that might be right. Is something right? Is this right? No, this doesn't seem right. So again, try to understand simply is that you reincarnate here many times and you are already, God is already within you. Okay. All right. Take care. Have a good day. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.